All right, now it's time to look at some of the basic compressor controls. Now, there are 5 main compressor controls. Now, not every compressor has these controls, and some compressors have many more controls. But the basic idea behind compression is based on these 5 controls. So, they are threshold, ratio, attack, release, and makeup gain. Now, the threshold is the level that triggers the compression start and end sequence. Basically, that's when does the compressor kick in. So how loud does your signal have to be before the compressor starts compressing? That's the threshold, and that is a level that we set. The next control is the ratio. The ratio is the amount of compression after the threshold is crossed. Now, you'll always see the ratio in like a 2-to-1 or 4-to-1 or 10-to-1 configuration. It's always a something to 1. Now, what that means is, let's say we have a 4-to-1 ratio. For every 4 dB over the threshold, the compressor will only let 1 dB out. So a higher ratio means more compression. Next is the attack time. So the attack is the time it takes for the compressor to start working after that signal has crossed over the threshold. And that's usually in milliseconds. So basically your sound crosses the threshold, the compressor waits for the attack time, and then starts compressing. Now the release time is kind of the opposite of that. So after your signal has come back down below the threshold, the release time is the time it takes the compressor to return to no compression. Again, that's after the signal drops back below the threshold. Usually, this control is in seconds or fractions of seconds. A lot of times you'll see like a 0.1, which is 100 milliseconds. And the last main control or basic control is makeup gain. So through the last 4 controls, we've been adjusting them and turning down the level using the compressor to make things, quieter, make the loud things quieter. And now we use the makeup gain to turn things up at the end. So makeup gain is the adjustable output gain of a compressor to compensate for the volume lost during compression. So here is a little example of that. And this is really kind of exactly what happens when a signal comes into a compressor. The signal raises above the threshold, the compression sequence starts. The compressor then waits for the duration of the attack time, then begins attenuating or turning down the signal by the ratio, which is the amount of compression that we set earlier. The compressor is now compressing the signal. When the signal drops back below the threshold, the compressor gradually stops attenuating over the duration of the release time. So the signal gradually returns to the uncompressed level. And you can see that expressed here in this little diagram. So the light blue is your signal. So signal comes into the compressor, crosses the threshold, and then it drops down below the threshold, and then it just stays at whatever signal it's going to be. Now, the red dashed line is a compressed signal. So the signal comes in, crosses the threshold, right? The compressor waits the amount of the attack time, from here to here, and then starts compressing. Then your signal stays compressed until that signal drops back below the threshold. And then the compressor keeps compressing until that release time has passed. So it gradually lets go over the duration of the release time, again, usually in seconds, typically under 1 second. So the compression doesn't always start happening right after the signal crosses the threshold and doesn't stop happening exactly when the signal drops back below the threshold. Let me show you some examples of the compression controls in use. So what we've got here is just a pretty basic half note that just repeats. All right, so this is the compressor that comes with Logic. Let me just show you where things are on this compressor so you can follow along. So first off, we've got the threshold right here. It's this guy, this little slider we pull down. Then we've got the ratio over here, and the ratio goes from 1.0 to 1 all the way to 30.0 to 1. Remember, the ratio is a some number to 1 kind of setup. So for this one, let's set it at 5 to 1. Then you've got the attack time here. Right now it's set as fast as it can go, 0 milliseconds. That goes all the way up to 200 milliseconds. Next, you've got the release time, which goes from 5 milliseconds all the way up to 5,000 milliseconds, which is 5 seconds. Let's set that to 50. And over here on the other side of the threshold, you've got the gain, or the makeup gain. Now, you'll want to keep your eye right here on the gain reduction meter. Just about every compressor has a gain reduction meter, and that is going to show you how much the compressor is actually turning the sound down. So as I play this sound, I'm going to pull the threshold down, and you'll hear and you'll also see on the gain reduction meter the compressor starting to work. There it is. So that turned it down pretty good. As I move it back up, no compression. Back down, more compression. All right, so let's go ahead and park this right at negative 25 dB. All right, I'm going to bypass the compressor for just a second and show you the level of this signal. There we go, is right at negative 15 dB. You can see on the fader here on Logic, it shows us that signal's volume is negative 15 dB. Now we've set the threshold over here to negative 25 dB. So that's 10 dB below where that signal actually lives. So now we've got 10 dB over the threshold. With our ratio set to 5 to 1, that should give us 8 decibels of compression. So remember, with a ratio of 5 to 1, for every 5 dB over the threshold, the compressor is only going to let 1 dB out. So we've got 5, 10, so 2 decibels over the threshold is what the compressor is going to let out. Now the threshold is set to negative 25 dB. So I expect to look over here and see this set to negative 23 dB when I hit play. Let's see what happens. There it is, negative 23 dB. So now if we look up here at the gain reduction meter, it's not quite showing 8 dB of reduction. The gain reduction meter is not completely accurate, but it's a good estimate. So as I keep the threshold at the same place, let's take the ratio and move the ratio down to 2 to 1. You know, let's just type it in. 2 to 1. Now let's see what happens. All right, the gain reduction meter shows us we're getting 4, and it did show us we were getting 6 dB of reduction at 5 to 1. So we're getting about 4 on the gain reduction meter at 2 to 1, which in reality, remember, we're 10 dB over the threshold at a ratio of 2 to 1, should really be giving us about 5 dB of gain reduction. And if we look here at the meter on Logic's fader, that's correct. We got 5 dB of gain reduction. So as I pull the ratio up, the amount of gain reduction will go up, or you can drop the threshold. So as I pull the threshold down more, watch this gain reduction meter. Oh yeah, lots of compression. So the threshold and the ratio kind of work together. With a greater ratio, you don't have to pull the threshold down quite as far. With a smaller ratio, you need to pull the threshold down further to get more compression. All right, let's move on to attack. So we're going to just crush this here so you can hear the attack. Really focus on what the attack is doing. So remember, the attack is the time it takes the compressor to start working after the sound has crossed the threshold. So as I pull this attack up, really listen to the front part of the sound. You'll start to hear it poke through, and then the compressor will turn it down again. So here it is. You can hear that little at the beginning. Now, as we get up here over 50 milliseconds, you really hear the bass part of it start to poke through. Yeah, now we're shaping the sound. So let's bypass and let's see what we've done. Yeah, that's pretty cool. All right, so that's the attack. Let's move that all the way back down. Get a little bit less here. And I want to show you the release. So watch the gain reduction meter as I pull the release up. Watch how slowly it comes back to 0. All right, at 1000 milliseconds, that's 1 second. So after the sound comes back down below the threshold, which for this sound is after the sound stops playing, the compressor is still compressing for 1 second. Now it's compressing less and less over the course of that second, but it hasn't totally let go until that 1000 milliseconds has gone by. Now let me open up this sound. This is just a much quieter note, so let me bypass this. And you can hear these two notes. One's loud, one's a little quieter. And you can see them over here on the meter on the left. We're going to try and make that louder sound quieter. Kind of help match it up with this quieter sound. So I'm going to back the threshold and the ratio off. So the ratio, let's put that at 4:1. That's a pretty safe setting. And I'm going to drop this threshold as I listen until those two sounds are pretty close to the same volume. Once again, better turn that compressor on. Okay, so those are pretty close to the same volume now. And I'm going to look up on the gain reduction meter and see how much compression I'm getting. And then I'm going to go to the makeup gain and turn it up. So it looks like about a little under 15 dB of reduction. So let's pull up the makeup gain. And that is pretty much using a compressor. So in the next video, we're going to look at some of the different types of compression, some different compressor designs, and the different types of compressors.